Can I welcome everyone to this, the 21st meeting of the Public Petitions Committee in 2020. The meeting is being held virtually. We had hoped to take evidence today from Professor Deepanka Nandi, Consultant Neurosurgeon and Head of Department at Charing Cross Hospital and St Mary's Hospital, and Professor at the Imperial College London, on Petition 1723, Essential Tremor Treatment in Scotland. Surgery commitments, however, have prevented him from giving evidence today, but he hopes to be able to attend next week. And I should emphasise we're extremely grateful for Professor Nandi being willing to come before the committee, and appreciate that he's unable to be with us today. If we can move to the first continued petition for consideration today, which is Petition 1545, Residential Care Provision for the Severely Learning Disabled, submitted by Anne Maxwell on behalf of the Muir Maxwell Trust. Petition calls on the Scottish Government to recognise residential care as a way severely learning disabled children, young people and adults can lead happy and fulfilled lives, and provide resources to local authorities to establish residential care options for families in Scotland. Following the last consideration of this petition, the committee wrote to the petitioner asking what issues they wished the committee to raise with the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Sport in relation to their petition. The petitioner's response formed the basis of the committee's letter to the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Sport. A response has been received on behalf of the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Sport from the Minister of Mental Health, as learning disabilities is within their portfolio. A further response from the petitioner has also been received, and these responses are summarised in the clerk's note. I wonder if members have any comments or suggestions for action. I certainly feel personally a great deal of frustration about this petition, and I think that you can see from the submission from the petitioner that is something she feels very strongly. I'll call Gail Ross first.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, I mean, I agree, and I was quite frustrated with it myself. And the thing that struck me was that the Scottish Government in their submission have said that there's too small a number for individual residential units in communities, and if they were basically reading between the lines, if they were going to do it, they would have to do it on a national basis, but that would go against their policy of taking people out of their communities. But I think the irony of this petition is that the petitioner has already had to go out with not just her community, but her whole country and access the care down in England, which seems to be excellent. It really is a shame that there's not something like this available in Scotland, because, you know, from what the petitioner has indicated, there certainly seems to be a need. But, you know, then on the opposite side of that, the Scottish Government do have the policy of wanting to care for people in their own homes, and they say that high quality care at home can be accessed. Now, I don't know if that's true all over the country, but it certainly seems to be that in some areas you find it very, or people would find it very difficult to access the high quality care that is said to be available. I think that there are a lot of issues in this petition that still need to be addressed. I just worry that this committee is not the place for it. We have had the Scottish Government say that there's been a short life working group. They've done the Coming Home report, and they're doing the review of adult care services as well. And I just think the work that they're doing with COSLA as well hopefully will lead to some solutions for the people that, you know, are in this group. I do find it very frustrating that where we are in the parliamentary term means that maybe we can't give as much put as much emphasis on as we would have normally. I would really have liked to have put this to another committee, but I feel that we should close the petition under Rule 15.7 of Standing Orders, and I do that really reluctantly, but just given the powers that we have, I really can't see anywhere else to go with it. But I really would like to put something in our legacy paper to bring it to the attention of the Health and Sport Committee for the next term of Parliament, if that would be agreeable with other members. Thanks.
Thank you. Maurice Corrie.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, I agree with what the comments with Gail Ross has just made, my colleague. It's a very, very difficult one here because we know how frustrating it is for families with offspring in this situation, and it's really dreadful to think that we have to go down south for this, and yet we are a caring society in Scotland, and therefore we should be able to resolve this. And I'm disappointed that we can't get any further with this with the Scottish Government at this stage. But safe to say that despite the fact that we may be in a new Parliament next year and next session, the petitioner can bring this back again after a year, and I think it's something that she should consider doing. But I think at this stage, and as I agree with Gail Ross on this one, is that just to move it to another committee at the moment would not necessarily solve the issue in the immediate future. This deserves more input from us and from Parliament. And I think at this stage we have no option other than to close the petition under Rule Point 15.7, the standing orders, on the basis that the comments and in relation that the Scottish Government feel there's no more they can do, which is disappointing, to be honest. And I think, but there we are faced with that position. But I think we should, hopefully this will be picked up again and certainly will be put into our legacy paper. Thank you.
Thank you. David Torrance.
Thank you, Convener. Like my colleagues, I think this is a very difficult petition. I agree with what my colleagues have just said, but I would like it to be left in a legacy paper, like Gail says, for the Health and Sport Committee. And that's all I've got to say, Convener. Thank you.
Thank you. Tom Mason.
Thank you, Convener. I basically agree with what has been said so far, my colleagues. It shouldn't be left as it is, ideally. But if the only way forward is to leave it into legacy, then so be it. So closing it under Rule 15.7, I think, is the only way at this stage, and notification through to legacy papers so it can be picked up in the next Parliament would be the best solution. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I mean, my feeling is that the pushback constantly from the Scottish Government is they have a policy of people being supported in their communities and in their homes. And what the petitioner is saying is that for a group of people, that is not appropriate. And because the policy is to keep it in homes, there's a pushback on families who want something different, which is not actually what the policy should be. It should not be exclusively only one thing. It should be meeting the needs of the individuals. And if you don't have the provision, it's then very, very difficult. So I found some of the tone of the Scottish Government response a bit challenging. And I think if I was the petitioner, I would be as clearly from the petitioner's own submission, quite annoyed is the kindest thing, possibly slightly insulted that they hadn't thought of this, that this wasn't part of the understanding that what that policy was. But I think this will be a theme today, that as a committee we're right up against the fact that we're coming towards the end of the parliamentary session. We want to be honest with people about what we can do between now and March, and basically, you can identify issues that really matter here, but it's going to be for a new Parliament to decide. And so, I'm very reluctant to let the petitioner go in a way, but I accept what my colleagues are saying, which is, we have to be clear that there is a limit to what we can do. I think we can write to the Education Committee and flag up that they should be thinking about this. Health and Social Care Committee, is it really our policy that we only say the only way we can support people with complex needs is in the community, and therefore we will not? If you remember, at the very beginning, there was a big issue about whether we even counted the numbers right. There was a proper analysis of how many of this group there was. And I do think that this is underpinned a wee bit by an attitude which says, well, why are you asking for that kind of support? This is what we've decided, and I think that is problematic. But again, in terms of what we realistically can do, I think we can write to Education Committee, to Health Committee, look, there's a big issue here about not having a one size fits all policy. There needs to be flexibility, and we need to listen to people with learning disabilities and complex needs and their carers, so this is not just closed down in this kind of way. So I think we could agree to do that. I think we should agree to close the petition. We should emphasise to the petitioner that we recognise exactly just how long a struggle this has been, and that should they wish to return to this in the new year, in the new Parliament, they actually don't have to wait a year. They can do it as soon as the new Parliament is brought back again. So I do think this is unsatisfactory, but I think we're agreed reluctantly and with no sense of want to let the petitioner down, that we would perhaps put something in our own legacy paper, but flag it up the relevant committees and the clerks can advise us which would be absolutely the right ones for that, in terms of the core issues round here, which is round the policy which the Scottish Government has pushed back on, and we would therefore be agreeing to close the petition and thank the petitioner very much and remind her that she can bring this back as soon as the new Parliament is convened. I do have agreement to that. I think from what we've already said, that would be agreed. Yeah. In that case, we are agreeing to close the petition, but corresponding with the relevant committees and ensuring that we flag this up in our own legacy paper. And we would want to thank the petitioner and regret really that there has not been the scale of progress that she might have hoped for. If we can move to the next continued petition, which is petition 1769, Higher Education Scotland by Marie Oldfield. Petition calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to review the way Higher Education Scotland is set up and delivered in Scotland, including how students' rights are enforced and whether there is scope to allocate more power to Scottish Public Services Ombudsman. And can I welcome Jackie Bailey, MSP, for consideration of this petition. Since the last consideration of this petition in September 2020, the committee has received submissions from the Minister for Further Education, Higher Education Science and the Scottish Funding Council. A submission has also been received from the petitioner. In the submissions, the Minister and the Scottish Funding Council outline the procedures in place should a student have a complaint, with the Scottish Funding Council commenting that it has, quote, no evidence that the current approach is not effective in protecting the interests and rights of students, and the issue was not raised with us in our recent review of colleges and universities. In our submission, the petitioner reiterates that at present, the Scottish Public Services Ombudsman is limited in what remedies it can enforce to resolve a complaint. To contrast the powers of the SPSO with those of the Office of the Independent Adjudicator for Higher Education in England, which is able to consider a wider range of complaints and has the power to award financial compensation. And I wonder if at this point it might be useful to ask Jackie Bailey if she wants to make a contribution in the petition, and then we'll go around the committee members, and then if she wants to say something further at the end, I will allow her back in. So Jackie Bailey.
Thank you very much, Convener, and I hope I won't detain the committee for too long. Can I say how genuinely disappointed I was in the responses from both the Scottish Government and the Scottish Funding Council, having tried to assist Marie Oldfield, who is my constituent, with her complaints against Glasgow University, has proven that I think that there is, certainly to my mind, a gap in the opportunity for complaint or redress, particularly for postgraduate students, and a gap in the opportunity, therefore, for the protection of students' rights and interests. In her own case, the Scottish Public Services Ombudsman found actually that the complaints procedure of Glasgow University was not fit for purpose, and they also noted that the number of postgraduate complaints in the enhancement-led institutional review seemed to suggest that there was a problem there. So there is no doubt in my mind that there's a problem, but as I said, I'm disappointed in some of the solutions or the lack of solutions offered by the people that the committee have written to. Marie Oldfield has, though, identified a body in England, the Office of the Independent Adjudicator for Higher Education, and they can consider a much wider range of complaints than the SPSO, and they can indeed award compensation. Now, I understand, based on the convener's comments, in respect of the last petition about timescale, that there may be a view that this petition should be closed. I would obviously encourage the committee to keep it open and pursue it further and write to both the Scottish Government and the Funding Council about this body that exists in England. If, however, you have no other option but to close the petition at this stage, then I wonder whether you would give an indication if you would welcome a further petition from the petitioner in the new parliamentary term, looking at whether such a body would have a role and be relevant in Scotland. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you. Maurice Corrie.
Convener, yes, I've listened intently to those comments by Jackie Bailey and picked up a point that I actually picked up on as well. It was this question of the Office of the Independent Adjudicator in Higher Education in England. And I think I think at this stage, with the responses from the government and also the Funding Council, and in light of the fact that universities are not public bodies, and from the point of view of this and the question of extending the existing powers, I think it would be much more beneficial for the petitioner to come back with a new petition specifically aimed at this comparison to the Office of the Independent Adjudicator Higher Education, which is currently running in England. And I think that's a good way forward, because at the moment, I think really we're faced at the moment to close petition under Rule 15.7 standing orders on the basis of the Scottish Government's responses and also the Scottish Funding Council responses in relation to them not wanting to extend, as far as the government's concerned, the existing powers available to SPSO, and indeed that the current approach, the SAS states, there's no evidence that the current approach is effective in protecting interests and the rights of the student, is not effective, I should say. And therefore, I think a fresh look at this would be more beneficial to Mary Oldfield, and likewise is in my region. She's a resident of my region as well. I think the concept of bringing back a new petition in the new Parliament would be a very good idea to take this forward from the petitioner's point of view. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. David Torrance.
Thank you, Convener. When you look at the submissions from the Scottish Government and from the Funding Council, neither of them, the Government's not going to change its plans to extend powers, and the Funding Council was quite happy with the present situation, and they've actually quote say there's no evidence that the current approach is not effective in protecting the interests and rights of students. I think there is nothing we can do as a committee but to close it under Rule 15.7 of Standing Orders. But like what Maurice says, I think the petitioner should bring the petition back to the new Parliament, specifically on the topic that Maurice was talking about. Convener, thank you.
Thank you. Tom Mason.
I really endorse what has been said by the panel so far. It's unsatisfactory with the situation we've got here. And we need to focus on exactly what the issues are in a much more definitive manner, and that will require additional time and additional discussion. So the only way really to achieve that is for the petition to come back with a very focused petition in the new Parliament, and in order to move the government away from its rather rigid position it has at the moment. So closing it, I think, is the only way we can make that happen at the moment. And hope it comes back as a further petition in the next Parliament. Thank you.
Thank you. Gail Ross.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, I agree with everything that's been said, and the suggestion of bringing a new petition back with a different focus on the way they do it in England, I think, is the right course of action. So I would agree to close. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. I mean, my own sense is that the petitioner has, feels as if she's had a pretty serious runaround, and it's not anybody's responsibility, and there's really nothing to see here, and everything is, there's no plans to change anything, and I do think the Scottish Government should have perhaps reflected a bit more than what actually was being said. That if you get someone in a position where she didn't get access to learning, and then was getting charged for it regardless, and the kind of the frustration of just being running around the system. But I do think that this the opportunity for the new Public Petitions Committee to look specifically at that new option, or what that body would look like, is probably what we've come to a consensus on. I wonder, Jackie Bailey, if there's anything you want to add?
Really very much to agree with you, Convener, because the petition does bring evidence of a problem. I think you summed it up perfectly. Here was somebody who could find no redress and was given the runaround in the system. The SPSO found that there was a problem, but their remit didn't allow them to deal with it. So I welcome very much the committee keeping open the option of bringing a future petition before you.
Yeah, I think that it was, I think it's a term, academic freedom, as if it was something caught up in that category, which didn't really feel as if it should have been in that category, but it was as if it was somebody else's problem. So I think, again, as we will hear repeated, I think, regularly from now on in the Public Petitions Committee, we are caught up in a parliamentary timetable. We do recognise there's an issue here. We think that perhaps with the focus on looking at what similar powers are and what kind of body would you need to address this problem is perhaps what the focus of the petition should be. Should one be lodged? And of course, as ever, the clerks are available to support someone to look at how that might best be worded. And there isn't an inhibition about bringing back a petition for another year, as I said, because it will be a new parliamentary session. So we're agreeing, I think, to capture what the committee has said. We are recognising there's a significant issue here. We don't think it's really satisfactory. The Scottish Government is just saying we have got no current plans. We don't really think there's a problem, but that we would be saying to the petitioner she may wish to reflect on whether she can bring something back in the new parliamentary term that is absolutely focused on the kind of solutions that she's looking for. So we are agreeing to close the petition under Rule 15.7. Can I thank Jackie Bailey for her attendance, and we would thank the petitioner very much for engaging with the committee. If we can now move on to the next continued petition on our agenda today, which is Petition 1770, Improving Water Safety, lodged by Margaret Spears. The petition calls on the Scottish Government to work with all relevant bodies across Scotland to improve water safety by ensuring that all waterways have life-saving equipment such as lifebelts and buoyancy throw bags with ropes to allow multiple attempts at rescue, and tampering with water safety equipment is made a criminal offence of endangering public safety. Since the petition was last considered in September 2020, we have received written submissions from COSLA, Glasgow City Council and Police Scotland. In its submission, COSLA states that it would be supportive of life-saving equipment to be available on waterways where it is deemed appropriate or necessary. However, it urges caution with regard to the establishment of a new criminal offence, stating that it would support the promotion of education and preventative activities to avoid the criminalisation of people. Police Scotland similarly does not agree that tampering with water safety equipment should be made a criminal offence, explaining that legislation is already in place which would support police action where equipment is removed or damaged. In its submission, Glasgow City Council highlights the work it has done following the intervention of the petitioner to add distinctive ropes to lifebelts and new additional throw bags. It states that the use of the distinctive rope has been successful in deterring thefts and vandalism, thereby ensuring that the equipment is available when needed. Again, I think this is a very important petition. I had the privilege of meeting with Mr and Mrs Spears, who have sought really to address a problem as a consequence of their own tragic circumstances, and I think I was struck then, and I think the committee has been struck since, by their persistence and courage. I must say that I don't accept the notion that this is not shouldn't be a criminal offence. If somebody were blocking off fire exits from a building, if there was a fire, I think we would regard that as a criminal offence. And I think that we need, my own sense is that there should be recognition that if you are vandalising life-saving equipment, then that's a very serious offence, because at some point in the future somebody may require that and it's not available. I understand that people would prefer education. We would prefer that people there was a campaign that got people to understand why these things matter, and why at some point, if you do this stupid vandalising thing, it can have consequences, very serious consequences that people have to live with for the rest of their lives. I also recognise that the progress that's been made with Glasgow City Council, and I think there's been a cross-party support for this in the council, that finding a solution that has been identified with the family. The question I think to put to the members is there more that we can do at this point? And my own sense is that, again, we would hope this is something that the Parliament could take on, but we need to think about whether realistically public petitions can do anything more at this stage. But I'll call David Torrance.
Thank you, Convener. I would like to thank the petitioner for bringing this petition forward. As somebody who lives on a coastal town and has on several occasions seen vandalism to our life-saving equipment on our promenade, it just absolutely disgusts me and somebody can do that. But when you look at the submissions from Police Scotland and from COSLA and Glasgow City Council, Police Scotland don't agree with the petitioner. They actually say the legislation is in place that could allow them to prosecute somebody who damages or removes equipment. But I'd also like to thank the petitioner because in bringing the petition, she's highlighted to Glasgow City Council who have acted and put measures in place to try and improve work safety, and COSLA fully supports it as well. So, like yourself, I don't think the committee could take this further as a petition, and I would like to close the petition under Standing Rule 15.7 and thank the petitioner once again for bringing it forward and highlighting the irresponsibility of some people around the waterways and the damage that they do and the costs it has on people's lives after it. Thank you.
Thank you. Tom Mason.
Thank you, Convener. I agree with that. The approach has been stated at the moment. The timing of all these things at this stage in the Parliament is difficult, and certainly it is a disgrace that some of these things are vandalised and could cause a loss of life as a result. I think we have no alternative but to close at this point, however, and to see if in the hope that a new petition can be brought to focus on a specific requirement for a specific offence to do with vandalising safety equipment in general. I think limiting it to just to this particular situation, I think a mistake. It has to be on a more general basis of jeopardising safety equipment in their use. Thank you.
Thank you. Gail Ross.
Thanks, Convener. Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right with what you said, and Tom Mason and David Torrance also touched on it about vandalising safety equipment, as in, blocking fire doors or taking away fire extinguishers. I think that this is absolutely in the same category. So, education is all very well, but I think that there does have to be some kind of penalty because, like you say, it's a life or death situation in some issues. But Police Scotland and COSLA have already said that they don't want to go down that road. So I think there's little that we can do to push that. I just wonder. I mean, I do agree that as a petitions committee, I don't think there is very much more that we can do. But the thing that struck me was the really, really good work that this family have done with getting these coloured ropes in place, and how that has shown that the thefts and vandalism have really gone down. I would love to see that rolled out everywhere. Now, whether that's some sort of national campaign with local authorities and the manufacturers, I don't know how that can come about. It's just, if it's working in one local authority, I think really it's a no-brainer for it to work, in other local authorities that have got waterways. I think that, was it Maurice Corey that said last time we considered this petition as well, about water safety reports or similar things that local authorities should have in place, and through his cross-party group they had said that there's only some that have them and some that don't. I don't know. I think that maybe in closing the petition, we should take an action to write to either COSLA on behalf of all local authorities, or just write directly to all local authorities to bring this to their attention, to ask them if they've got a water safety, I'm calling it a report, that's a wrong word, and to bring to their attention these coloured ropes, and, you know, to say that it might be a good idea for them to look into it as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Maurice Corrie.
Thank you, Convener. Can I pick up the last point of what Gail Ross has just said? Exactly right. Yes, I'm on the cross-party group for prevention of accidents, and we are in the process of writing to every single local authority on working on their water safety policies, because we discovered there's only 5 of them have actually got policies either in place or nearly in place, which is really rather appalling. The problem is it's not a statutory requirement on them, so it's a matter of persuading them to have this. But I think it would be a very good idea that that we as a committee write, maybe when closing this petition, which I think that we have no option other than to do at this stage, is that we write to the individual authorities. So that would actually give a lot of impetus to the work that we've been doing on the cross-party group in trying to persuade them to look at the whole of their inland and coastal water safety policies. So yeah, I take that point up, and therefore I have a deep interest in this particular subject. But I think it's proven that the new equipment that Margaret and Duncan Spears have brought forward ideas, actually a brilliant idea, and I'd like to thank them for bringing this petition forward, although it's been a very tragic circumstance which it's been born out of. So I thank them for that, but it's obviously worked with the Glasgow City Council, and I think that should be extended. So I would think we should write to the local authorities if possible, but also maybe certainly write to the cross-party group chair in relation to what we've discussed today, because clearly I think there are movements and things going on, and certainly we've been involved as a cross-party group in talking with COSLA as well. So it's very much at the front of our minds on that. So I'd like the petitioners to feel that this has spurred us on to look at this further in relation to other actions that we're taking. So I think at this stage, I think as far as the committee is concerned, our committee is concerned, is that we've no option other than to close the petition under Rule 15.7 standing orders on the basis of what's been said in relation to Peace Scotland and the statutory requirements. But I think this is something that we're taking further on with the cross-party group. So hopefully that helps in that case. And I agree with what the comments of my colleagues as well.
Thank you. Can I call Gail Ross back in?
Yes, Convener, already been covered. I was just going to suggest that we copy the letter to the cross-party group as Maurice Corrie had indicated. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. In that case, we are agreeing to close the petition. We're recognising that there are a number of really very significant issues outstanding, that there has been progress, and we note the progress made in Glasgow. I think it would be fair to say we're highlighting concerns about a view that, you know, whether this should be a criminal offence or not. We do think it should be regarded as a public safety question. I think Tom Mason made that point. There's more generally about the impact of vandalism. But that in closing the petition, we would be writing to local authorities to highlight to them the need for water safety plans. It may be that petitioners might want to think about, should they be arguing for it to be a statutory offence, a statutory responsibility to local authorities. That might be another area that they may want to explore in the next Parliament. But that we would, in the meantime, be writing to local authorities to highlight the very important issues about local authority planning in this regard, and that we would copy into the cross-party group if that's agreed. If that's agreed, we can, again, as I've said already, want to place and record our thanks to the petitioners, and I'm absolutely clear that their campaign will continue, given the determination and persistence they've shown so far, and that if they are wanting to think about a new petition, and obviously that is something that they can do after May of this year. I want to thank them again. If we can move to the next continued petition on our agenda today, which is petition 1789, Learning Difficulties and Disability Qualifications by James A. Mackey on behalf of the 1673 Network. The petition calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to increase the number of professionals such as speech and language therapists, educational psychologists, physiotherapists, psychiatrists and occupational therapists qualified to assess children and parents with learning disabilities or difficulties and other behavioural problems to reduce the number of children taken into care. This petition was last considered by the committee on 17 September 2020. At that meeting, the committee agreed to write to the Minister for Children and Young People. It also agreed to write to the Scottish Trade Union Congress and other relevant professional bodies. Responses have been received from the Minister for Mental Health, the Association of Scottish Principal Educational Psychologists, the Royal College of Psychiatrists in Scotland, the EIS and the petitioner. And I was very struck by the substance of the responses to this petition. It's clearly an issue that people regarded as serious. I was very interested in, I think, the EIS making the point there's basically been a retreat by these professionals from schools and educational establishments, and much more of the responsibility lying with individual class teachers. And clearly teachers have a key role in this, but I think they would have been expected to be part of a supported team. I should declare an interest as someone who taught for more than 20 years, and in my time, professionals like educational psychologists come in, and they didn't just come in to give teachers advice, they actually worked directly with families. They assessed young people, whether they were in the right placement and so on, and I'm not convinced, given the figures that have been given to us by the EIS, I think it was the table, that the steep rise in the number of young people with additional support needs, but the decline in the support staff to support them, I personally regard that as a very significant problem, and I do think there are serious questions still to be asked about that. I would hope that we would maybe at this stage raise with the Scottish Government these direct questions that have been raised by the professional organisations and look for a response from them. But I'll call Tom Mason.
I entirely agree with what your comments. It is worrying that the resources seem to be just disappearing, and we are getting, as a result, more young people going in. Like you, I always remember, even in my day, many years ago, professionals of various types being very much involved with the class and the teachers. And if this isn't happening, then we want to know, must explore why it's happening. So I think demanding we have an explanation from the government as to what's going on and to try to reverse a bad trend should be appropriate. So certainly, hopefully we don't have to close this at this stage, and we can carry that over as necessary. Thank you.
Thank you. Gail Ross.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, I agree. Some very serious issues to be discussed here. The Scottish Government has completed the independent care review, and we've got the promise, but as you say, the other evidence that we have from the professional organisations need to be addressed. So I would agree to write to the Scottish Government and ask them how and when they're going to be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you. Maurice Corrie.
Colleagues on what they have said so far, and I think it's evident that, and it's overpowering the comments made by the various professional bodies, and these are the people who really know what needs to be done. And I think we have no option other than to ask Scottish Government about these concerns that are expressed by these organisations. And I would ask us, we continue that, to do that and see what is happening in relation to the outcome of the promise and other strategies that the government has been considering and implementing. But clearly there's something needs to be done, and I would recommend that to happen.
Thank you. David Torrance.
I agree with my colleagues that we should continue petition, write to the Scottish Government, because the concerns that's been raised in submissions to us are that concern me, and I would like to see the Scottish Government answer them and put a timescale on how we're going to address them. Thank you, Convener.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I think there is an agreement that we write to the Scottish Government ask for their response to the various concerns expressed by professional organisations in the EIS, and whether that what has been said here will inform their actions. And I think that the point that David makes at the end there about timescales for that is also important. So we would be agreeing, as I've said, right, Scottish Government, and we can revisit this petition in the near future. Thank you. If we can now move to the next continued petition on our agenda today, which is petition 1807, compensation for paying university students, lodged by Jordan Hunter. The petition calls on the Scottish Government to make funding available for Scottish universities to compensate paying university students for lost class time and a lower quality of education as a result of staff strikes and the COVID-19 crisis. At the last consideration of this petition, the committee agreed to write to the Minister for Further Education, Higher Education and Science and the Scottish Public Service Ombudsman. Submissions have now been received from the Minister, SPSO and the petitioner. In this submission, the Minister highlights that universities have made huge efforts to continue to provide high quality learning experience for all of their students, supported by the Scottish Government and the Scottish Funding Council. The SPSO advises that although its numbers do not indicate large numbers of students have brought the concerns noted in the petition to the SPSO, this issue is being raised with it. I think the question here is, again, what we should be doing. My own feeling was that this may be one again that we can't progress any further. I think it links to the questions raised in the earlier petition that was supported by Jackie Bailey about the attitude of bodies to students. There is a whole question brewing just now around students and having to pay rent while not necessarily having to attend university. A lot of their learning going online, but there doesn't seem to be any recognition that may have an impact on young people. Part of it's COVID. Some of it feels to me predates that in terms of, as we've seen earlier, perhaps some lack of responsiveness from these organisations. But the question, and I'm interested in members' views on this, is there actually something we can do at this stage to progress it further, or should we have to close it? I'm going to call Gail Ross.
Thanks, Convener. Yeah, I mean, this is a really difficult one. I was a student myself, it was a wee while ago now, but you can, I've spoken to a lot of young people, and experience of college and university is a lot more than just learning. And it's going away for the first time, and it's socialising, it's meeting new people, it's, finding yourself as a person. And I can't imagine how difficult it's been for these young people this year. And as the petitioner said, what with the staff strikes and then COVID-19, it's just been disruption after disruption. Unfortunately, you touched on it. I think that it is a bigger issue, and of the thousands of students that go through our colleges and universities every year, ASPSO say that there are a small number that have raised concerns about this. But then, on the other side, it's COVID-19 is something that none of us have ever had to face, and we're all struggling and trying to do the best that we can. And I think that, universities and colleges have, in the main part, done really quite well with getting their courses online, the ones that they can get online at such short notice. So I have great sympathy for the petitioner and all the other students and what they're mentioning in the petition. But unfortunately, I think as a committee, I don't think there's anywhere else that we can take it. So reluctantly agree to close under Rule 15.7 of Standing Orders. Thanks.
Thank you. Maurice Corrie.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, it is a difficult one, and I think, as you say, from the previous petition that we've talked about this morning, which Jackie Bailey presented as well, there's an interesting correlation here. I think we're in such unusual times, as my colleague Gail Ross said earlier on, in relation to what has happened, and I think we have to give credit to the universities and colleges. They're doing all they can to move things online, and also some hybrid teaching and presentations. It's also it's really, and I come back to the point about the universities and colleges are not public bodies, they are in their own right, although obviously there's a massive influence from Scottish Government and the public and the state. But I think that they have mechanisms in which people can be compensated as far as possible. I don't think they're ever going to achieve full reconciliation on any issue that might be raised from in which the petitioner is actually saying. But I think at the moment, I think we've no option other than to close the petition under 15.7 of standing orders in relation to this. We are in exceptional circumstances. I have a son going through the process at the moment, and they've managed to cope, but it's very difficult, I know, in different universities and different things. And I think with the mix of the model with the accommodation now under private contractor ownership, as well as obviously the universities, there's a mix there, and obviously the new way of teaching. So I think it's sadly, I think at the moment we have to close the petition under Rule 15.7. But if the petitioner wishes to bring it up within a year, again, if the thing's still going on, then I feel no reason why they can't. Thank you.
Thank you. David Torrance.
Thank you. I don't think we could take this any further as a petition to the committee, and I agree with my colleagues that we should close it under Rule 15.7 of standing orders. Thank you, Convener.
Tom Mason.
Thank you, Convener. I haven't anything more to add. I think the issues covered by my colleagues. Therefore, closing it under 15.7, I think, as a stage.
Okay, thank you very much. I think, to me, that part of the issue is the extent to which the Minister simply said, well, really nothing to see here, everything's okay, people have made immense efforts, when in fact there are some quite challenging issues along the line that I'm sure students will be bringing to his attention. I have every confidence that these issues will be getting debated in the Parliament elsewhere, so it's not that if it's not being considered by the Public Petitions Committee, this is not going to be a feature of political debate going forward, because it's such a big issue, both in terms of the safety of young people and what they're entitled to in terms of education, and with the shift online, whether they actually need to be on campus or not. So while there is some reluctance, I think we're agreeing to close the petition. I would say that we know these are challenging times. We also have confidence these issues will be considered closely by the Parliament, and of course the petitioner can write to individual MSPs, their own MSP, and argue, engage directly in that way. But we are agreeing to close the petition at this stage, and we would want to thank the petitioner for their engagement with the committee, and we would recognise that these important issues that have been highlighted. Thank you. If we can now move to the next continued petitions on our agenda today, we did agree to bring two petitions together and consider them together, which is Petition 1813, Reform the National Curriculum to include all African Scottish history, lodged by Eunice Olomide. The petition calls on the Scottish Government to reform the national curriculum to include Afro-Scottish history, including artefacts of African diaspora, culture, cultural and economic contributions, the role of the British Empire, and the benefits to Scotland from colonies of the Caribbean and Africa. And Petition 1814, Compulsory Education of Black, Asian and Minority Ethnic History in Scottish Schools, lodged by Toby Amamzim. This petition calls on the Scottish Government to embed Black, Asian and Minority Ethnic History into the school curriculum. Since the committee's last consideration, submissions have been received from the Scottish Government, the petitioner for 1813, the Coalition for Racial Equality and Rights, and Andrew Strachan. These are summarised in the Clerk's note. The Scottish Government advised it has now formally committed through the programme for government to find ways of promoting diversity and better teaching and learning about Black and ethnic minority history and the importance of tackling racism in society today in schools. This commitment will in part be met by the increasing diversity in the teaching profession working group and the recommendations of Professor Rowena Arshad's report, Teaching in a Diverse Scotland, Increasing and Retaining Minority Ethnic Teachers. Since our papers were published, we have received a joint submission from the Coalition for Racial Equality and Rights and the petitioners. The submission notes that the Scottish Government discusses diverse teaching, including addressing the underrepresentation of minority ethnic teachers in Scotland and the creation of learning resources. The submission, however, raises concerns that no specific actions have been identified to address the issues raised in the petition. Again, I think this is a really important couple of petitions, raising important and challenging issues for us about to what extent there is a diversity in our teaching of history and our understanding of our own history as a country, to what extent people from black minority ethnic communities are teachers and therefore providing role models and a challenge to the view of what our education system should be about. So I think there's really, really important issues here. It feels to me that this is a long-term and a bigger project than we can offer in a short time that public petitions is going to remain in action. But we may want to think about whether we could flag this up to one of the relevant committees as something that actually would be worth further examination. But I'm going to call Maurice Corrie.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, this is an interesting one, and obviously combining the two petitions, 1813 and 1814 together is logical. I think the Scottish Government has committed to find ways of promoting diversity, better teaching and learning of the various minority issues and history, and the importance of tackling racism in our society today in schools. And I think that continues on. Sometimes it's not going fast enough, and sometimes it's going okay. But I think, as you quite rightly say, Convener, it's something probably that should be flagged up to another committee which would take this forward in due course, bearing in mind that the petitioner can come back in a year's time if they feel they're not satisfied with the actions we take. But I think at this stage, I'm sufficiently happy that I think we should close the petition under Rule 15.7 of the Standing Orders on the basis I've just said, that the Scottish Government has given a commitment to find ways of promoting diversity in our schools. And I think we should see how this plays out. But I think certainly it should be, in inverted commas, monitored by an appropriate committee in the education system. So that's my situation. I'm then closing the committee, closing petition.
Okay, thank you very much. Just to remind our colleagues that, of course, because it's the end of a parliamentary session, a petition can be brought back immediately once the new Parliament has convened and the Public Petitions Committee has been re-established. The year rule would then apply after that, and I think that's quite an important and comforting option perhaps for some petitioners who've seen their petitions being closed. David Torrance.
Thank you, Convener. I think the commitment from the Scottish Government to promote diversity and to find ways of doing it reassures me. But I would like to pass it on to the Education Committee just to highlight so they could in the future look to see what progress has been made. And that way we could have the checks in there just to make sure that the Scottish Government is moving fast as it can possibly go. So I'm quite happy to close the petition under Rule 15.7 of Standing Orders. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Just to flag up, I think perhaps in other times we would have referred the petition to the Education Committee, but because the Parliament has coming to its end, then again the petition would simply be sent back to us at the conclusion of the parliamentary session. But the recommendation that we write to the Education Committee, I think, is probably an important one. Tom Mason.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the government has made certainly some commitment to getting this situation improved. But I think if Education Committee could take a watching brief on it, is the appropriate thing to do at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Gail Ross.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, I mean, absolutely. If we were in a different time earlier on, certainly this would be referred because it is hugely important, and I would ask for it to be included in the legacy paper of the Education Committee. I would also write to the Equalities and Human Rights Committee as well, because it's an equality issue, and I think that it is so important that you know, having, as well as our committee, 3 committees, having a watching brief on it would be preferable. So if members agree, I would put two different committees. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. I think there is a consensus recognising the important issues, that this is a substantial bit of work over a long period of time, that the Public Petitions Committee, given the circumstances we're in, will not be able to add to the petition at this stage, but that we would want to write to the Education Committee, Human Rights and Equality Committee, to emphasise the importance of these issues. It is about what is taught, is also by whom it's taught, and it's about in the context of the human rights of people and the recognition of the experience of people being feeling excluded from the education system, and us not properly appreciating our full history as a country. But we want to thank petitioners very much for bringing both these petitions before us. We are agreeing to close them, but we will write as has been indicated by members, if that's agreed. Yeah. Okay, if we can now move on to the next continued petition on our agenda today, which is Petition 1820, Compulsory Bereavement Education in Schools by Samina Javid. The petition calls on the Scottish Government to introduce compulsory bereavement education into the school curriculum. Since the committee's last consideration, submissions have been received from Young Scot, Chaz and the petitioner. Young Scot advises that their research shows that to support young people who are experiencing death and bereavement, there must be more information on the subject, appropriate support and more conversations on the topic in schools. Chaz notes that there is a recognition that there's a lot of very good tools available, but the feedback it hears from teachers indicates that they do not feel sufficiently confident fully to utilise these. From these conversations, it is clear that education and training does not cover death, dying and bereavement. Chaz recommends this is formally included in teachers' training and education. I think this is, again, I'm going to reflect on our last discussion about the personal experience that brought this petition before us. We know that issues like bereavement can knock young people to such an extent they may never recover in education. So for some young people they can do, and it's about being sufficiently supportive so that in really desperately sad times that there is supports there that allows them still to continue and recover if they can ever recover, but at least be supported to continue in education and to find ways of dealing with those kind of terrible things very early in life. I personally think it might be worthwhile writing to the Scottish Government just to get a response from them to these very important points that have been made to us as a committee by the organisations that I've identified. But I shall call David Torrance.
Thank you, Convener. When you look at the submissions from Young Scot and Chaz, Young Scot's done a lot of work around about this area, and Chaz was very positive about some of the things in the school, but also about what was absent in teaching training there. I think we need to write to the Scottish Government to hear their views on the submissions raised by Young Scot and Chaz. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Tom Mason.
Thank you, Convener. I'm very conscious that there is an assumption that we make about young people that they're very, very resilient to some of these issues, but in fact, in practice, they're not, and they're as sensitive as anybody else. And I think the more we can make sure that they are aware of the issues, and when they are confronted with a death within their school or close to them, they do understand what is going on, and they are have a few more tools in their chest in order to cope with it. So I think writing to the government, make sure these issues are fully addressed, I think would be the right thing to do.
Thank you, Gail Ross.
Thanks, Convener. Yeah, I mean, as yourself and colleagues have said, there does seem to be a gap. So I would support writing to the Scottish Government to seek the views on the submissions from Young Scot and Chaz as well.
Thank you. Maurice Corey.
Yes, thank you, convener. I also too support what my colleagues have said already in relation to Scottish Government. And having visited Robin House at Chas in Balloch, I mean, I'm absolutely amazed at the work they do. And I would certainly commend all the points that they've made, which are very practical, and we need to sort of take those up. But I think it'd be important that we get their views, the Scottish Government's view on the Young Scot and the Chas submissions, which again, I thank them for that. And I thank Samina and Javid for bringing this petition before us, because it is something we need to address forthwith. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think there's agreement then that we recognise the importance of these issues. I think Tom Mason is right to say that we sometimes imagine young people are resilient, but we have to find means of supporting young people to be able to cope with these issues if it's not to have long-term consequences for them. So we are agreeing tonight, the Scottish Government, seek their views on these submissions. If we can move on to the next continued petition on our agenda today, which is Petition 1822, more NHS money for hospital beds, lodged by Colin Stewart. Petition calls on the Scottish Government to provide increased funding to the NHS to enable hospitals in Scotland to increase bed capacity. This petition was last considered by the committee on the 1st of October 2020. At that meeting, the committee agreed to write to the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Sport and NHS Scotland. A joint submission from the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Sport and NHS Scotland has now been received. The petitioner was invited to respond to these submissions but has not to date. I wonder if members have views on this. My own sense is this is a big policy area. I think certainly in the past there was a policy argument for reducing the number of acute beds, shifting into the community. I would hope that this at least would be getting tested, this policy. I don't think it's good enough to simply say, well, this is our view. It needs to be tested against actual lived experience. And I certainly would hope that the lessons of COVID have been learned around this. We don't know what they all are yet, but clearly some of the measures around lockdown was because we feared for the capacity of hospitals to cope. So I'd be interested in the views of other members. I mean, I think there's probably a recognition this is something that's not going away, but that whether it's something that the committee can look at further, I'm not convinced. So it may be that we, in closing it, think about at least writing to the Scottish Government to understand it, emphasise we think there is an issue here and we think they should keep it under review, or write to the Health Committee, but would interest in other members' views. Tom Mason?
I think we all want more funding and more resources put into health services, but I think the COVID pandemic will cause us to think very clearly what the forward plans of strategies should be in terms of public health, beds, acute things, specialist services, and so on. So I think really at this stage the whole issue of health is up for review. And I think once we manage to get the pandemic out of the way, looking in a very holistic way at the way we provide service for health, I think is going to be absolutely important. And I think whatever governments get in come May, I think their number one task is to look at it in a very holistic and effective fashion to get the solutions sorted out so that we don't have continued arguments on the detail, but can get the overall health of the nation improved substantially. So I think, however, there's no option at this stage is to close it, but write to the Health Committee to make sure this is kept under review in the forward situation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Gail Ross?
Thank you, Convener. Yeah, I mean, on the health situation, certainly bed numbers is something that comes up locally with me on quite a regular basis. So I think that I agree with both yourself and Tom Mason. I mean, this is something that is going to have to be under review now, given that we are hopefully on the way out of the pandemic, but we are going to have a really close look at health and to see how it's delivered and to evaluate whether we're doing things right and whether things can be done differently in the future. So yeah, again, reluctantly close the petition because I can't see that there's anywhere else that we can take it, but I would certainly write to the Health and Sport Committee or the Scottish Government and the Scottish Government. I think this is another one that should be put in our legacy paper and ask the Health and Sport Committee to keep a watching brief on it as well. But I'm sure that, you know, given where we're going to be going after May, that they will be doing that anyway. But I think it'll be nice for us to just point them in the right direction, as it were. Thank you.
Thank you. That's our job in life, is to point everybody in the right direction. Maurice Corrie.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, I agree with the comments my colleagues have made already. I think it's a question of supply and demand, and obviously there is a big move. Having chaired a health board before I came into Parliament, I understand it's about desires of people wanting to be moved back home as soon as possible after, say, surgical care or inpatient care, and then obviously in day cases the same, and that's the sort of the modus operandi. But nevertheless, it's about balancing what's needed and avoiding the deployment of our professionals and nurses and doctors into meds, about worrying about what bed is going to come up next. It's a difficult one, and particularly with the pandemic now, but I agree with my colleagues, and I think at this stage we close the petition under Rule 15.7, the standing orders, but we do write to the Health Committee and just as a flagging it up. And obviously, this could be something for our legacy paper as well, keep an eye on it. But I think hopefully with the review of the health service after the COVID pandemic, we might see some changes in the right direction, and hopefully we do. Thank you.
Thank you. David Torrance.
I'm happy to agree with all the recommendations of my colleagues and close the petition under Rule 15.7 of standing orders. Thank you, Convener.
Okay, thank you very much. So I think there is agreement that at this stage we would close the petition, but that we would write to the Health Committee and to the Scottish Government to flag up that I think there are big issues here, and that COVID obviously complicates that further, and we'd hope there'd be a very close review of the implications of a policy that was developed in a time, you know, long before COVID was even thought of. So we're agreeing to close the petition, but to thank the petitioners very much for their engagement with the committee, and of course, if they want to bring back a petition, they're able to do so in the new session. I'm proposing now to suspend. It's now 10:36. I propose that we come back at 10:40 and deal with new petitions. So, suspend until 10:40. back to order and proceed to agenda item 2, which is consideration of new petitions. Second item on our agenda is consideration of new petitions. The first new petition is petition 1830, Protect Scotland's War Memorials, by James Watson on behalf of Friends of Denison War Memorial. The petition calls on the Scottish Government to introduce legislation which recognises desecration or vandalism of war memorials as a specific criminal offence. The Scottish Government submission advises vandalism is a crime regardless of the motivations for it, and it condemns all acts of malicious vandalism and graffiti. The submission notes, as there is legislation currently in place to deal with the vandalism and desecration of statues and memorials, including war memorials, the Scottish Government has no current plans to introduce new legislation for this specific purpose. I think this is an interesting and important petition, and I should declare an interest that I publicly supported the Friends of Denison War Memorial, but this is an issue in many communities, and in some that's been flagged up to me about respect being recognised for what these memorials stand for, and it's, you know, it's to me it's about recognising the suffering of communities, of individuals and families when they went to war, and I think they should be respected. I think there's an issue about what schools can do to speak to our young people. And a lot of these groups, you know, in across Glasgow, have done some very positive work, really, to engage with young people and to try and get them to understand why this matters. So the question really is whether there should be legislation, and whether at this stage, again in the parliamentary year, we're able really to do much about that. I just would want to emphasise my own view that even if we do close the petition, we would want to underline and emphasise to the petitioner that we do recognise this as a really important and serious issue. It'll be interesting to what to hear the views of my colleagues, and I'll call Gail Ross.
Thank you, Convener. Yeah, I agree. And this petition puts me in mind of the other one that we had about dog theft. And, you know, specific, well, crimes, if you want to call them that, public disorder, and it being, you know, all included under the one, and vandalism, yeah, covering this one. I do agree. I think that you know, there are different, I hate to say it, but different levels of vandalism, and I think that this particular one, the same as, you know, when you see you get people going into the cemeteries and graveyards and, you know, defacing tombstones and knocking over stuff and all that. It's just completely unacceptable. So I would hope that, you know, when if a crime like this was prosecuted, that the Procurator Fiscal would look at the specifics of it and understand and see it for what it is, and how you quite aptly described it. Again, you know, I don't think that, strong as I feel about it as well, I don't think as a petitions committee that there is anywhere really that we could take it. But again, to, you know, to say to the petitioner that absolutely, if they feel that they wanted to bring it back to the new committee and have them consider it, then I'd be absolutely supportive of that. But where we are just now, you know, creation of new legislation is just out with our capabilities. So again, reluctantly close under 15.7 of standing orders. Thank you.
Thank you, Maurice Corrie.
Thank you, Convener. I think, and I agree with Gail Ross, my colleague, on what she has said fully, and I think that there is sufficient legislation in place, which the government has confirmed in its submission for prosecuting any vandalism of this sort, which is totally despicable and absolutely has no place in our society in Scotland, and it causes hurt and grief to those who are connected with any person who is mentioned on the War Memorial, or anybody who has taken part in that particular campaign or era. So therefore, I would think that the best thing at the moment to do is that, because we have legislation and we have legislation in place for covering the sort of damage and fines and even imprisonment, if the case may be, to cope with this. Therefore, I think at the moment we are in a position just to close the petition under 15.7 of standing orders. On that basis, there's currently legislation in place to cover the vandalism and desecration of statues and indeed memorials. And certainly there's no place in our society for anybody who does that in relation to damaging them or graffiti spraying or whatever a case may be. So I would opt now to agree with my colleague and close the petition.
Okay, thank you. David Torrance.
Considering that the Scottish Government are not going to introduce any new legislation and feel that the current legislation is fit for purpose, I think the committee has no option but to close the petition under Rule 15.7 of Standing Orders. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you. Tom Mason.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, I agree with my colleagues. The vandalism of war memorials is very, very sensitive to those who have loved ones remembered, whatever it is. But I'm conscious that there are other symbols which are important to other groups of people which aren't necessarily war memorials, and vandalising those equally is offensive and needs to be considered. But therefore, special legislation for war memorials I don't think is appropriate. But I think that, however, given that there is legislation that can cover all vandalism, and that the courts do have opportunity to vary the state, and that the courts do have opportunity to vary the sentences according to the depth of the offence. I'm satisfied that at this stage we can't add to any situation, and therefore I think closing the petition at this stage is appropriate. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think Tom makes an important point about other symbols and relevant things in our community that can be offensive, and Gail makes a point about graveyards. I find it deeply upsetting that anybody would even think of that, but we know that the distress that's caused. I think we are agreeing that we would close the petition under Rule 15.7 of Standing Orders. We are appreciating the significance of the points that have been raised by the petitioner James Watson, and we'd want to thank him and the Friends of Denison War Memorial, not just for bringing the petition forward, but for the work that they do to maintain the War Memorial itself, and to thank them for the engagement with the committee. It is something that they may wish to return to, and of course this is also, I think, the point being made that there is legislation there, and it is taken seriously, but also that there is a whole job to be done to perhaps educate some people about why these memorials and other things matter so much to people, but we thank them for their engagement. The second new petition on our agenda today is Petition 1833, Raise Awareness of Dyscalculia, lodged by Jade MacDonald. The petition calls on the Scottish Government to help raise awareness of the learning disability dyscalculia. In a submission on the petition, the Deputy First Minister and Cabinet Secretary for Education and Skills states that education authorities are required to identify, provide for and to review the support for pupils who need support to overcome barriers to learning, including dyscalculia, and outlines a range of resources available to help achieve this. The Deputy First Minister also highlights the Scottish Government's Additional Support for Learning Action Plan, which was published in October. This plan sets out how the Scottish Government will address the recommendations of the independently chaired review of the implementation of additional support for learning. A briefing paper also highlights the considerable work that the Education and Skills Committee has and continues to undertake in its scrutiny of additional support needs. And again, there is an issue for us. This is a theme that has been developing over many months in the Public Petitions Committee around access to education, support for additional support needs. The petition has been effective in literally raising awareness of dyscalculia, because it's not something I had been aware of in the past, and it is interesting to learn a little more about that. But as I said, this is a theme I think that we've been aware of. Is just the extent of support for young people with various additional support needs. In the past, we've dealt with part-time timetables, lack of staff, and it was mentioned even earlier in this session. And I'd be interested in views of the committee and how we might take this forward. Again, this is one I think that is going to be significant over the next period of time to ensure that, that while the number of young people being identified with various needs are clear, what is the relevant support that's been put in place for them? I'm going to call Maurice Corrie.
Thank you, convener. This is a very interesting one indeed, and I've had some experience of it in primary schools where I was on the parent-teacher council, and it was beginning to come up some years ago. I do think it's something that needs further examination. What can we do ourselves as a committee? It's certainly been highlighted to us, and I do thank Jade McDonald for bringing us in front of us. I understand the Scottish Government obviously is publishing recently its additional support for learning action plan. We're aware that the Education Skills Committee has been and continues to investigate the additional support for learning, which hopefully this will include. But I think we need to home in on this. And what I'd like to feel today is that we decide that we write to the Education Skills Committee to highlight the concerns raised in the petition for consideration for its ongoing work for additional support for learning. But at the same time, what more can we do in relation to this petition per se? And I think we're faced at the moment, because the government has updated its statutory guidance for implementation of additional support for learning. And I must declare at this stage, my wife is an ASN at a primary school. And this is a thing she comes across quite a lot. And I think that the government's also publishing its additional support for learning action plans, as I said earlier on. So I think quite all these things are covered. And I think, but if we can strengthen it by writing to the Education Committee, at the same time, I think we should close this petition at the moment on the basis that I've just given, and therefore I recommend that to the committee.
Okay, thank you very much. David Torrance.
I think we should write to the Education and Skills Committee to highlight the concerns raised in the petition, but also to see what progress has been made by the government. I know they've updated the recommendations, but we still need to see basically a timescale this is going to be implemented and how fast it's going to take to do it. So I'm quite happy to close the petition under Rule 15.7 of Standing Orders, but we have to highlight it to Education and Skills Committee. Thank you, Convener.
Okay, thank you very much. Tom Mason.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, I think in order to make sure this progresses, writing to the Education Committee to make sure this situation is progressed. Although it does we do recognise that the government has made some progress here and is taking the right actions at the moment. But unless we keep a review on it by some committee, I think it might go by the wayside. So closing at this stage would be appropriate.
Okay, thank you. Gail Ross.
Thank you, Convener. Yeah, I agree. I think that really important issues raised, but I agree with the course of action that my colleagues have suggested, and I really don't have anything further to add. So close, but write to the Education and Skills Committee to highlight the concerns. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think there is agreement that there has been some progress, but this is something that needs to be monitored closely. David Donner's point about timescale I think is important, but also my own feeling is that the Scottish Government needs to be open to seeing what is happening, the patterns and the experience that has been brought forward by groups and individuals like Petitioner, who feels that their experiences have not been properly or fully made aware of, and I think that's an important point too. I think we are agreeing to close the petition, but that we would be writing to the Education and Skills Committee again, and it relates to the earlier petition as well, that there are important concerns here about awareness of this particular condition, but more general issues around additional support needs, and hope that they would look at this in any ongoing work in the new Parliament. So with that, we agree to close the petition, but again, we want to thank the petitioner very much for their engagement with the Public Petitions Committee, and that this is something that they can turn to in the new Parliament. The next new petition on our agenda today is Petition 1834, Urgent Funding for Citizens Advice Bureau, lodged by Alistair Stephen. The petition calls on the Scottish Government to provide urgent funding to Citizens Advice Scotland to ensure that Citizens Advice Bureau continue to provide services for local people across Scotland. Our meeting papers explain that each Citizens Advice Bureau is an individual charity and therefore responsible for its own funding. While the Scottish Government provides funding to the advice sector, it does this to deliver specific projects such as welfare reform mitigation and the Scottish Government's Money Talk Team service. In her written submission, the Cabinet Secretary for Communities and Local Government highlighted the increased support that has been provided for the third sector, including Citizens Advice Scotland and Individual Citizen Advice Bureau, in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. This has included funding to help set up a national helpline, to purchase personal protective equipment, and to make physical alterations to Bureau to enable safe reopening for face-to-face advice services. And again, we want to think about what action we can take in this regard. I don't think I can overstate the importance of the advice sector at this time. Certainly there was a crisis in Glasgow, and that this was an issue that was raised about actually funding for this sector. And it's, it is one thing for the Scottish Government, I think, to fund individual projects that they've determined, but it is about sustaining a network of advice services as well, rather than just about, if you don't have the core support and funding, then these other projects can't be delivered. And I think that is a more general issue that maybe has been flagged up over time. So I would not want the committee simply, I think we maybe have to close it. I'm interested to see what people have to say. But my own view is that it is not enough for the Scottish Government simply to say we fund individual projects. It's not our responsibility to fund individual bureau. That's, all these individual bureau have their own jobs. They have a fundamental role at this time. I don't think the scale of the crisis that we're facing is, we've even probably can have the imagination to understand how serious it's going to be. It's going to be about accessing advice on welfare and all of the other things, and we know the important job they place in that regard. So again, I'd be interested in the views of the committee, because it's not clear how we could take this forward at this time. But I would, in one personal views, that we would want to underline that we recognise the significance of a properly funded sector in order to meet the challenges that are ahead of us. But I'll call David Torrance.
Thank you, Convener. The Citizens Advice Bureau is really important, especially locally. Somebody as us as MSPs in certain areas that have better knowledge and we pass constituents onto. So it's really important that they are funded. But the Scottish Government says it funds the whole of the advice sector and not just one individual part of it. And that funding is available to Citizens Advice Bureau from other sources like local authorities and the big lottery, things like that. So as individual charities, I know is important for every one of them and the boards that are part of it to try and go out there and get funding as somebody who's members of several third organised sectors. So I don't know if we can take this any further. I appreciate the help that they do and they give to the citizens that we all represent. So I think we have to close it under Rule 15.7 of Standing Orders. But I'm open to any feelings of the committee members. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Tom Mason.
Thank you, Convener. Difficult one. I mean, like all other organisations, similar organisations, the funding is becoming an issue under various problems we have. COVID-19 not excluded. I think if we need to, if we can, make sure that we keep it under review by some other committee. If we close it now, I think if we could write to maybe, I don't know what the appropriate committee would be, to make sure that continues to make sure the funding is available, or the core funding is available to such organisations, so that because it is vital. This advice is available to everybody, but I'm not quite sure what is the most effective mechanism to achieve that. But I don't think we can actually take it very far forward. So closing may be the only option we have.
Okay, thank you. Gail Ross?
Thanks, Convener. Yeah, I mean, as everybody before me has said, I don't think that we can overstate just how important citizens' advice is to everyone in Scotland, and certainly I deal with local ones in the constituency quite often, and you know we help each other out with constituents, and yeah, they are absolutely gold in terms of the services that they offer. I think that we do have to look at this through a lens of, as Tom Mason rightly said, diminishing budgets and the Scottish Government's inability to borrow. So we are really stuck between a rock and a hard place here. I would certainly pass it on in a letter, or I don't know if we want to put it in our own legacy paper, but certainly I think local government and communities committee would probably be the one that we could flag up to, and I know that they do, well, all committees do ongoing budget scrutiny throughout the year, so they might be able to find a place for it in that evidence sessions. There's also a Social Security Committee as well, which possibly might want to look at it too. So yeah, really important subject. Again, I think our hands are tied as a committee, but I would like to see it taken up in the new session by one of the other committees. Thank you.
Thank you. Maurice Corrie.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, I absolutely agree with what Gail said there in putting it before the other committees that she mentioned, both Social and Security Committee and the Social Security Committee, and also the Local Government Committee as well. I think it's a very important subject, this, because I know in my times as a councillor in the rural area of Argyll and Bute, we had a lot of issues to do with the Citizens Advice Bureaus. And one of the fundamental things when we came to setting budgets at the council was this was a line item that, funding of the CAB. And so much so that we could only afford to fund one office and not two others in Campbelltown and Oban, simply because we didn't have the cash. So I think it's something that we need to involve COSLA in. I think that at this stage we're in a rock and a hard place, as I agree with my colleagues. And I think from the point of view of where we stand at the moment, we will have no option other than to close the petition, but recommend that we write to the two committees that I've just mentioned. And also I think we should write to COSLA, because we're looking here at the allocation of budgeting from Scottish Government to the annual increments to local authorities, because on that basis, from when they come to set their budgets of local authorities, one of the line items, as I say, is always is the Citizens Advice Bureau, and it is an extremely contentious issue. And sadly, we see people slipping through the net because we haven't got the services in the communities. So I would certainly recommend that if we close it, then we do write to those people I've mentioned to you and look at how we might look at how special funding can be given in the circumstances from Scottish Government apropos the post-COVID scenario, because there certainly will be an increase of people coming to the doors. Thank you.
Okay, I think everybody recognises how important an issue this is, that we want the Scottish Government, COSLA, to be aware of the importance of these things, and that it's not just about, I mean, I would want to write to Scottish Government and say, look, this is not just an issue about a vehicle for projects that you've identified. These organisations need to be supported and funded appropriately, and in these times more than ever before, and that we would hope they could work with COSLA, that we write to COSLA in the same refrain, and that perhaps we would want to flag up to Local Government Committee, but also Social Security Committee, because there was so much, certainly my direct experience, where the intervention and support of a local bureau makes a difference between people securing an appeal or not, or getting the appropriate funding. And this is true in the case, for example, to go back to another issue this Petitions Committee has dealt with in the past with mesh women, that in fact the bureau being able to support women in making their case of why they need to be supported through the universal credit system has been very effective. So probably in other times we would have written these letters and come back to this petition, but given the fact that we are at the very end of a parliamentary session, I think we are agreeing to close the petition, but that we would send those letters in that regard to make sure that we have flagged up that there is something very substantial in this petition. And again, in closing it, we thank the petitioner very much and remind them that they are able to return with a petition in the new parliamentary session if they want to make sure this issue is further highlighted. I note that Maurice Corrie wants to come back in.
Sorry. Thank you, convener. Yeah, just to emphasise about the legacy paper, making sure this goes on to our legacy paper as well. I just wanted to highlight that. Okay.
In terms of writing to COSLA, I think, as I say, in other circumstances, we would be getting a response back and be reflecting on that. I just think that we want to underline to COSLA the importance of funding the advice sector, the importance of perhaps for them to be flagging up to government if that funding is inadequate, if there is a big gap there, because in any review of the impact of COSLA, then the support for advice services to citizens to be able to enforce their rights is really important. And of course, since Advice Bureau do more than just simply advice around social security, they are in a lot of cases a consumer rights area. It's where people go where they feel they need advice, and the statutory organisations or the organisations and local authorities don't any longer exist. But we're recognising, I think, the limitations of the correspondence, because we're not going to be bringing that back in front of the committee, but I think it's important that we at least flag that up. So we are agreeing to close the petition and thanking the petitioner for the bringing this to our attention, and if they want it to be pursued further, there is an opportunity to do so later. If we can move to the next new petition on our agenda today, which is petition 1835, criminalise the submission of misleading or false information in child protection cases, lodged by James A. Mackey. The petition calls on the Scottish Government to make it a criminal offence for any person knowingly to submit misleading and false information to a sheriff or children's hearing in child protection cases. Our meeting papers outline the opportunities currently available to allow information presented as part of court proceedings or the children's hearing system to be challenged, and also that the offence of perjury applies in civil as well as criminal proceedings. Our papers also outline the professional sanctions which could be taken should some knowingly provide false information to a hearing. In his submission, the petitioner reiterates his belief that reports prepared by social workers are not always based on facts, and explains that in his view, the action called for in the petition is necessary to ensure that all reports are based on truth. And I wonder if members have any comments or suggestions for action. Again, this relates to issues that we've been dealing with in the past around child protection, but I'll call Tom Mason first.
Yes, I'm conscious that this petition really is a pair to the one following on 1836. They go together. I mean, the reason why it's not a criminal offence at the moment is to maintain informality of the child hearings, and to make sure they don't get into a confrontational situation. If you've made it a criminal offence, the advice given would be totally different and less expansive, and people will have to be taking legal advice on a continuous basis. So I think in terms of trying to go through supporting this particular petition, I think I don't think it should go forward at this moment. But I think in making judgments, I think we should also consider the following petition as well. Maybe when we do that at this stage.
I think it's slightly complicated. I think we can. I think we have to make a decision in this petition because we haven't formally brought together, and they deal with slightly different issues, although I agree with you that they are related. I think specifically we're looking at, I think the point you make about the nature of the hearing system. It's not that people should be being dishonest, but there is a sharing of information, and obviously social workers and others have to meet the standards of their profession. So it isn't possible to consider them together, but it may be that discussion this informs what we might do with the following petition. But I'll call Gail Ross.
Thanks, convener. Yeah, this is another kind of example or a subjective view from somebody who has first-hand experience of a sector or something that's happened that possibly where the practice differs from the policy. I mean, there's a couple of things in it that make me feel a bit uncomfortable, and I wouldn't want to tar a whole profession with maybe one experience that has been negative. I think we need to be aware of that. I do think that there are quite serious issues that have been brought up, but I do also think that the Scottish Government submission that we got covers all these things, but then it's another one of these, the Scottish Government covers them all, then the petitioner comes back with more evidence to challenge what the Scottish Government has said, therefore, prompting further discussion. I mean, the Scottish Government have come back to say about perjury being an offence. They can also be held in contempt of court, and there can also be professional sanctions, and then the petitioner says, well, a lot of these things don't happen under oath, therefore, these don't apply. And it's a really, really, really complex and an emotive situation, because I would hate to think that there's anybody goes into children's hearings or a court situation that doesn't want the best for the child at heart. And to be blunt, if you're a social worker that isn't doing the best for the child, then you really shouldn't be in the profession. So I think that this is another one that I don't want to close, but I don't think that we can take it any further as a petitions committee. So I would like to see something in our legacy paper, and whether we pass that on to a committee as well. I'm, like Tom Mason, quite open to suggestions from other members. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Maurice Corrie.
Thank you, convener. This is a difficult one, and I've had one or two cases like this before me before, both as MSP and also as a councillor. This is a very difficult, both sides of it. The comment that about reports prepared by social workers not always based on facts, and explain that this, in his view, the offence is required to ensure all reports are based on truth rather than opinion or supposition. It's very difficult to get sometimes beneath that and into that. The social worker obviously is trained, and we understand that, and obviously they may see it one way and it may be another way. But I think there's a lot left, obviously, in relation to, there's a concern about, there's a feeling of a presumption of guilt for a family brought before the panels and things like that. Certainly from my experience, from what I know, is from people who worked in that area, is that it's pretty watertight. On most cases, there might be the exceptions, and I think, therefore, I don't know what we more can do as a committee in relation to this particular petition. And I agree with my colleagues on both of what was said in relation to, you feel you want to do more, we could do more. But I think at the moment we've done as much as we can at this stage. But certainly something we should highlight in the legacy paper from this committee going forward. And I think at the moment, we are in a position only really to close this petition under Rule 15.7, the standing orders, on the basis that any individual who knowingly provides false or misleading information, child is hearing, risk potential sanction. And again, I come back to my points I made earlier, and also the fact that the hearings provide appropriate opportunities for participants to challenge that information. And I know that does happen, and I've seen experience of that. And the Scottish Government doesn't consider the creation of a specific offence in relation to children's hearings to be necessary or appropriate. Well, I would take slight issue on that one. Necessary, that's something maybe we can speak to the Law Society about, whether there is something we could write to them about in closing this petition. That particular point, I would be very grateful to the committee would consider that and other points that I've made. But thank you.
Okay, thank you. David Torrance.
Thank you, Convener. Like my colleagues, I find this a very difficult petition. I don't think the committee could take it any further, but I'm happy to go with all the recommendations of my committee members and write to the different organisations and the Law Society, but I think we have to close the petition under Rule 15.7 of Standing Orders because we can't take it any further.
Okay, thank you. I think on the Law Society question, we are straying into doing more than simply closing and writing. There would be an expectation that they would respond, and if we've closed the petition, that's not appropriate. I think Tom Mason's right to say there is a link to the following petition, which is about the role of opening up how there's a kind of a regulation of the way in which individual child protection complaints are dealt with. So I think we can deal with that separately. But on this question of the hearing system, this is something that when I was in the Education Committee, there was an inquiry, and I know that they've done one not that long before that. This is something that's very much on their agenda about how effective it is, and getting the balance right between, as I think Tom said, informality, allowing people to discuss. And there is a concern that what was meant to be about the focus on the needs of the individual child and their support and protection has perhaps become more formal. More the presence of lawyers has been greater, and that's been an implication for the capacity of the young person and their families to engage. I think there's very much an issue there, and of course the hearing system has been regarded as an important way of addressing the rights of young people and their protections, and certainly the reluctance for a decision, or if there's a decision for a young person to go into care, that it is interrogated very seriously. But we recognise that petitioner has a view perhaps shaped by by direct experience and having conversations about this. My own suggestion would be that we would close the petition, but that we would write to the Education Committee and say this is something we know you've done work on this before. These are the issues that have been highlighted. Should you be looking at this in the future, we would hope that these questions would be part of the questions that could be asked. And I wonder if people would agree on that basis. Okay, if that's agreed, we're going to close the petition. We understand the important issues here, but we'll write to the Education Committee to say that we believe this is something that should they be looking at this matter in the future, and there's a big issue around children's rights and protections, that we'd hope that would take this into account. And we want to thank the petitioner for engaging with the committee on this important issue. The final new petition on our agenda today is Petition 1836, expand the remit of the Care Inspectorate to investigate individual child protection complaints, lodged by James A. Mackey. The petition calls the Scottish Government to expand the remit of the Care Inspectorate to investigate individual child protection complaints. Our meeting papers explain that although social work services discharge many of the responsibilities relating to child protection and will often lead in a given case, significant collaboration, multi-agency working with police and NHS staff is key to the decision-making process in child protection cases. The Scottish Government states that as a result, while inspections of child protection activity are led by the Care Inspectorate, they must involve scrutiny partners in order properly to reflect the multidisciplinary nature of child protection practice. It states that investigating complaints involving child protection activity would require a similar approach, noting that this could risk duplication or confusion with the functions of the Scottish Public Services Ombudsman and the Police Investigation and Review Commissioner. In a submission, the petitioner argues that as there is no single independent organisation which has the power to investigate a complaint holistically, there is insufficient accountability in child protection. I think, again, this is an important issue. I think this is such a big argument, but whether the Care Inspectorate should take this on, I think it would be quite a leap for us as a Public Petitions Committee to take a view on this at this stage. I am very mindful of the importance of there not being duplication, but that there being coordination and people speaking to each other. You know, there are instances, tragic incidents throughout recent years where a lack of conversations between different relevant bodies has meant that young people have been let down in sometimes very serious circumstances, has led to loss of life. So I think the challenges for the public organisation bodies around children's protection, how are they coordinated and how are they tested so that the right decision is being made? I'm not sure that the solution is the one that has been is the appropriate one, but maybe that's something we should investigate further with organisations that might have a strong view on it. But I'll call Gail Ross.
Thank you, Convener. I mean, yes, this of course was the basis for the introduction of the legislation around named person, to make sure that there was one individual that was responsible for different age groups, but of course we don't have that now. But I think that there are a lot of things that have been thrown up during the course of the submission and the petitioner as well. I would agree that I think that to take a view on this and to, you know, say that we have to close it on any basis would be wrong at the moment. I would like to get some more information and some more evidence from organisations like the Children's Reporter, Children's here in Scotland. You mentioned yourself, the Ombudsman. I'm sure there are other organisations that the clerks and other members could mention as well. But certainly it's a big issue, and like yourself, I'm not sure that the solution is for the Care Inspectorate to take on that role. But I would certainly like to get some more opinions as to how this could be, to find out first of all if there is an issue, and then to find out how it could possibly be solved. Thank you.
Thank you, Maurice Corey.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, I agree with Gail Ross and all the comments she's made. I think at this stage we still need to do some fact-finding and some more information gathering. And I would recommend at this stage, it's such an important issue following on from the last petition there, is that we write to the key stakeholders such as the Scottish Public Service Ombudsman, Children Here in Scotland, Scottish Children's Reporters Administration, the Scottish Child Law Centre and Who Cares Scotland, for example, and others that are deemed appropriate by the committee and any suggestions. But I do think this is something that we need to investigate further. Thank you.
Thank you. David Torrance.
Thank you, Convener. Like my colleagues, I think we need more information on this before we can make any decision on the petition. So I would recommend that we write to all the key stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you. Tom Mason.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, I agree with my colleagues. We need more information. It's an area which needs to investigate, and we really need to be sure that these hearings are properly policed, if that's the right word for it. But who should police it, and on what basis? I think we need investigating very fully as we go forward. So writing to the various stakeholders and organisations appropriate is the way to go. Thank you.
Okay, I think somebody there agreeing with you. Just to say, I think I agree that we should be writing to key stakeholders. I think the challenge here is that the rights of the child are at the very centre of this, and it's something that's engages everybody may actually not engage everybody fully or afford the protections that we want. So I think the question we're going to ask is if the solution identified by the petitioner is the right one, and indeed, whether people actually accept that this is what the problem is. that there isn't sufficient oversight. But I think that would be useful, so we're agreeing to take that forward in that regard. And I should say that we have key stakeholders there identified, but if the clerks feel that there are other useful bodies that we've not mentioned that we should be contacting, then that's something that can also be done. So on that basis, we have reached the end of our agenda today. Can I thank the petitioners who provide us with the means of having a conversation, thank members for their increased or continuing capacity to deal with virtual discussions, and also to thank broadcasting and clerks, because obviously it's remarkable that in such a short time we've managed to get to a point where we can have these committee meetings in such an efficient and productive way. And with that, can I thank everyone and close the meeting.